I'm moving the slides, so that's why I'm sitting down.
Okay.
Oh, that's fine.
Just tell me, you're going first, right?
Yeah, sure.
So just tell me when to move the slides.
All right.
Abby, and tell me when to move the slides.
Okay.
All right. If we can please have your attention, thank you very much. I'm James,
I'm Kurt.
Abby. I'm Annalyn.
and our topic is Civil War weaponry. We were all tasked to research. You can go ahead, move down. One different item. So mine was the Springfield 1861 rifle. I believe Abby did the bayonet. Cole will be covering, or Kurt will be covering the Colt 45 revolver, and Annalyn will be covering the gun.
And that's just a picture. You want to go up?
Sorry.
That's just
Yeah.
different weapons and equipment. We did some that aren't in that picture, but I just thought it was cool to like see it all laid out like that. So.
All right, so let's go down. So the Springfield 1861 was the standard issue rifle used by Union infantry during the Civil War. The rifle was created and manufactured in Springfield, Massachusetts, where it was given the name Springfield. The barrel was 40 inches long, and it fired a .58 caliber ball of, how do you pronounce it? Like niche?
Mini ball?
Yeah, like the ball of it. Sorry, I'll just continue. The barrel was 40 inches long, firing a .58 caliber ball, and the total weight was around 9 pounds. The model 1861 had a general effective range of 200 to 400 yards, but could reliably hit a man-sized target from well more than beyond 500 yards. Though firing distances in the war were often much shorter than 500 yards. The model 1861 was aimed at using flip-up leaf sights. The sight had one sight that was set for 300 yards, and with both sides flipped up, was set for 500 yards. With both sides flicked down, it was set for a range of 100 yards. The average price of a rifle was around $15, depending if it was from wholesale or a private contractor. Various producers of the Springfield rifle were Springfield Armory, Colt's Patent Firearms, a manufacturing company, Providence Tool Company, Eagle Manufacturing Company, Alfred Jenkins and Sons, Lamson, Goodnow and Yale, Star Arms Company, and various other private contractors. The rifle was produced from the years 1861 to 1865. The model 1861 was like relatively hard to come by during the early years of the war, but once it got into mass production, when Springfield licensed the firearm to all the other private companies, they were able to produce over 1 million rifles and ship them out to the war, and it was a much faster shipment out to the Eastern Theater set of operations. So in the West, they were much slower to get the rifles off the jump, but they ended up being able to distribute them, by the end of the war. It was the gold standard rifle. Mostly, it used a flintlock, or used a percussion cap primer, which is what they would cover the bullet in, is because it's much more resistant to weather and fire, so it could endure worse conditions and still hit its target right on. And it was originally designed by the U.S. Ordnance Department, and they have the patent and then licensed it to those contractors I listed earlier to the next slide. So usage in the war, sorry, let me get my notes up here. The rifle was the weapon of choice and issuance in the war, that and a Colt revolver. The previous weapon of choice was a Spencer M1 1860, the first rifled shoulder weapon to be produced on such a large scale. However, that was decommissioned as a Springfield 1861 was much more easy to produce, and the Spencer's still and is considered genuinely rare. However, some people argue that the impact the Springfield had on the Civil War is a little bit overstated, because a lot of times it would be given to inexperienced troops and they would end up aiming over their heads. It was something to do with the way the sightings were lined up, and only experienced marksmen knew really how to aim the rifle. So oftentimes the shots would just fly right over the enemy's heads, or so a lot of times the inexperienced soldiers were instructed to aim low at the feet, so they had a higher chance of hitting anywhere on the body in the big like clusters on the battlefield. And all the firefights in the Civil War were relatively close range. Like I said, usually with the double leaf sight up would not go above 500 yards. So most of the time it was 100 to 200 yards with the combat. So the Springfield could load around 3 shots per minute with an experienced soldier. So they would just load them in and kind of just shoot blind at the line and hit whatever they could hit, while the more experienced marksmen would kind of hang out in the back and try to pick off generals and more aimed and focused targets. So next slide, thank you. And then the last time it was used was in 1860. Well, it's still used, but when it was decommissioned from the war was in 1865, when the Springfield Model 1866 was created. It's really similar to the 1861, but it uses a trapdoor loading mechanism, which I'm not a gun guy, but I think you can just pull this back and load the bullet in right there. So that's why they converted to the 1866. When the time came, it was much easier to reload and could shoot up to like 6 or 7 shots per minute, depending on how experienced the soldier was in combat. So that was my presentation on the 1861.
So I'm going to be talking about bayonet use in the Civil War and go over a little bit of the history of it. This is a bayonet on the screen. It's a rifle with a knife on the end. So the bayonet aspect of this weapon is going to be the knife on the end. So this was originally introduced in France in 1688 by that French name on the board that I can't pronounce, so I'll give you the liberty of reading that on your own. In 1688, they were introduced as the club bayonet. So that means it would just be attached into the barrel on the end of the rifle. That really fell apart in one year because it crippled the use of the rifle. So you couldn't fire out of it if you were using a knife, and it was hard to maneuver. So as we'll see used in the Civil War, it turned into a ring bayonet. So that would be attached at the end of the barrel versus inside of the barrel. And that would have been 1 year after the original implementation was when the ring bayonet began to be used. So that's how you'll see it in the Civil War. Almost there. I didn't make my slides very clear, but as repeating firearms were used, so you'll see like faster shots coming out, that bayonets weren't really used a lot because they're slow and hard to move. They weren't effective in physical battle, and according to CivilWarAcademy.com, they were rarely used in combat or used at desperate times when you're hand in hand and you just need to have a way to protect yourself. The mass majority of battlefield deaths were actually caused by the rifle, not by the blade at the end. And in fact, only 1% of Civil War casualties were actually as a result of the bayonet. So they weren't effective in physical combat. But on the next slide, they were used more effectively psychologically. So the article To the Point, published in Civil War Times, they state that the mere sight of an oncoming line of infantry brandishing their glittering blades could cause opponents to break. So people running at you with knife sticks is scary. That's what they were used for, and that's kind of the joke of the bayonet, is that you couldn't hurt people, but you could scare people with your knife stick. So the one place that they were actually used effectively was in Little Round Top in Gettysburg. So EssentialCivilWarCurriculum.com states that the 20th Marines' most famous action came on July 2nd, 1863, when it helped defend Little Round Top on the battlefield of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. At a critical moment, the regiment swept down the hill in an exciting bayonet charge, driving away 2 regiments of attacking Confederate infantry. So, yeah, you'll see in this picture, you can't see it very clearly, but again, it's the knife sticks coming at you. It's intimidating. So overall, you'll need a bayonet when you need a bayonet. They aren't used as much anymore due to advancements in technology, but in the Civil War, they were intimidating nonetheless. That's my presentation.
Will be speaking about sidearms and more specifically revolvers used during the Civil War, and I'll be presenting 3 different types, 2 of which were used mainly by Confederate and Union, and a third which was introduced at the time but wasn't mainly used by our soldiers, but more on the French and Britain side of soldiers. So one of the main revolvers was the Remington M1858 revolver. This was invented by Eliphalet Remington, and it was produced by the Remington Repeating Arms Company. It was used by foot soldiers and cavalry. This was mainly produced by children learning in factories how to make them. They also learned how to use them outside of war, and then they would be drafted into the war and have knowledge of how to use the firearms. A fun fact about this pistol was it was the preferred type of pistol for, as I said, soldiers and cavalry, but also gunslingers and mercenaries at the time, due to the fact that the top strap of the hammer, and it had a lighter hammer fall, therefore giving the user a easier motion of pulling back the hammer, loading the round, and firing again and again in a constant motion. It was one of the first 6-cylinder revolvers ever created that used metal rounds instead of a lead ball, or as James stated, it was another type of ball. Next slide, please. The next revolver used was the Colt Army Model 1860, designed by Samuel Colt and produced by Colt's Manufacturing Company. Was not able to find the exact factories where they were made, but the brand and whatnot. This was the first revolver to use a cap and ball 44 caliber round, which was a lead ball. You cracked the revolver open and you loaded them in with black powder. It was the jack of all trades because it was used by cavalry, foot soldiers, artillerymen, and naval soldiers. Victims died more often by lead poisoning and disease caused by the wound than the gunshot itself. Because of the lead ball, it would stay in your leg and it would be hard to remove. An interesting fact is, as I said, it didn't load with a revolving cylinder. It would rotate with the cylinder, but in order to load it, you had to pull a switch, crack the barrel open, which would reveal the chamber, and you would load the balls in with black powder, then load back the hammer, and that would cause the mechanism to fire again. An interesting movie reference that I found while we were doing the same time as the movie. These were the same revolvers used by Josie Wales, which featured an all-black handle and a silver body on his right, and another with a dark silver handle and a silver body on his left. This was also a household firearm before and after the war, so it was introduced to men, women, and children for home protection. And then after the war, it was still used for several years before more modern firearms were used. Next slide, please. And this is an interesting one which I found, and it's, forgive me for the butchering of this, Lamat revolver. And this was chambered in either 42 or 36 caliber cap and ball round with black powder, similar to the Colt. It was imported from France. It was invented by, forgive me, Jean-Alexandre Lamat of France. It was the only revolver ever created to have a 20-gauge smoothbore shotgun barrel on the bottom. And it didn't see a whole bunch of action in the Civil War due to the fact that it was used in the Franco-Prussian War by France and British soldiers. It earned the nickname the grape shot revolver due to the fact that it was very erratic in where it shot. It didn't have a lot of control since the recoil was so explosive. 2,900 of them were produced, but after I looked at it, only 100 of them were used in the Civil War by our soldiers. They were produced by the Son of Paris London Army Company, which was in France. And an interesting fact about this revolver is this revolver is featured in the Rockstar game Red Dead Redemption, and this can be bought for $172, which in today's cost is about $5,500. And that is all I have for the revolvers, and that'll be it.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Gatling gun. So it made history as the first successful machine gun and inspired a lot of different drawings and things for other machine guns. It was invented in 1862 by Richard Jordan Gatling, and the Gatling gun was created with the intention of discouraging large-sized battles and creating like a more humane way to kill. I'll get into that a little bit more later. Here I just have like the first patent for the Gatling gun, which I thought was kind of cool because I'm pretty sure this is like his actual original drawing. And then same thing with this is just like a letter explaining why like he wanted to create it. I can't read that, but I have a quote on the next slide, so if you want to scroll down for me. So Richard Gatling, he was born in North Carolina in December 1818. He then moved to St. Louis in 1844, and he got his first patent for a seed planter. He was an inventor, and he had lots of different patents on things. I think that one's a sign from his hometown, like just saying that he was an inventor, and he invented a variety of agricultural implements. So I think that's kind of cool. He even made a machine to help grow rice and wheat. He also studied medicine, but he never practiced as a physician. When the Civil War started in 1861, Gatling was living in Indianapolis, and even though he was born in the South, he was an avid supporter of the Union and the abolitionist movement. Like I mentioned, he created this gun as a more humane way to kill, and this is a quote that he wrote in a letter to a friend, and it just says, "It occurred to me that if I could invent a machine, a gun, which could, by rapidity of fire, enable one man to do as much battle duty as 100, that it would, to a great extent, supersede the necessity of large armies, and consequently, exposure to battle and disease by greatly diminished." So he'd seen just like all the disease and all the gruesome battle going on in the Civil War, and like the main weapons at this point were like the bayonet and the rifle, which he didn't feel like were a very humane way to kill. So that was his intent with creating this. And there's just a picture of him, so you can go ahead and scroll down. Alright, so how it works. The Gatling gun has 6 metal barrels, and they're arranged in a circle, and it's mounted on a wheeled cart. The gun operator turns the crank, and a bullet enters the barrel from a magazine, and then rotated to the firing position. After each bullet was fired, the barrel continued to move and was reloaded with another bullet. So right here, I have a video if you want to play it, and can you just like make sure it's muted, because it's kind of, yeah. This just kind of shows how it works, and I thought the visual was just really helpful because I didn't quite understand when I was reading about it.
This guy. This one.
No, over.
This.
This one.
Other one.
Oh,
YouTube one.
we have
There you go.
exited.
Sorry, I thought I put that in right.
It's okay. We got to figure that out. This one's the
One more, yeah. So then the first model could fire 200 rounds per minute and use paper cartridges with gunpowder and a .58 caliber bullet. And the introduction of brass cartridges made it possible for the gun to fire 400 rounds per minute, and eventually it got up so it could fire 3,000 rounds per minute. So this was a very early model created in the Civil War. And the first patent for it, I believe, was 1862. So it kind of just started right as the Civil War did. Although it did get limited use in the Civil War just because it was so like ahead of its time, I guess. Like nobody really knew quite what to do with it. However, 12 Gatling guns were purchased by Union commanders and used in the trenches during the siege of Petersburg, which was June 1864 to April 1865. Later on in the war, it kind of turned into like people really abused the power of the Gatling gun. Like for example, it was used in a lot of like attacks against Native Americans, which is really unfortunate. And it was also later adopted by Britain and France, and it was used against like indigenous people like in Africa, and that was also just really not good. Yeah, they like have mass attacks to defeat indigenous warriors. And then Russia also purchased over 400 Gatling guns and used them against Turkmen and other nomads of Central Asia. So it really caught on pretty quickly in other areas other than the US, and then was used not very well. It was also used a lot in the Spanish-American War. You can go ahead and scroll. So by the time World War I came around, the Gatling gun was banned. People were like, this is not safe to use, and it had been pushed aside and replaced with an automatic machine gun. Gatling's motivation for making the gun was to decrease violence, and it made warfare even more devastating than it had been before. So his goal wasn't really, his intent wasn't really fulfilled. But then later on, different machine guns kind of did fulfill his intent. And it made a comeback in World War II when it was used as the model for the Vulcan minigun, which was commonly manufactured and put on helicopters in the Vietnam War. So again, this is a picture of like one of the early Gatling guns. And then that's the Vulcan minigun, which was used in World War II and the Vietnam War. And then that's just a modern day machine gun. So I can kind of see between here and here, but I know that there is more to it than just how it looks. But I think it's cool that this early model that he had in 1862 is like still kind of used today. So it's the end of our presentation.
Stay up there for a minute while we ask these questions.
Do you need to turn it on?
Yeah, you should.
Yes.
So basically,